Download our free guide, Starting Your Photo Business, at photoshelter.com/mkt/research.
Okay, hi. We're back with John Harrington from Washington, D.C. He's a freelance photographer and currently the president of the White House News Photographer Association. He wrote a book, The Best Business Practices for Photographers, which is currently in its second edition. We're talking about business stuff with John, and right away I want to say, what are some of the common mistakes that photographers make who are new to the business, and how can they avoid making some of these mistakes?
I think one of the biggest mistakes photographers make when they're just starting out is starting out low on their rate. When someone opens up a corner store, they don't start out by saying, "Oh, we're the corner store. We're going to sell, our widgets, our various sundries at a loss, and make it up over time." No, they determine what their cost of doing business is, and they start out with a rate that is profitable for them. And once you get a phone call from a photo editor or a corporate client, and you tell them, "Oh, my rate is $200," when your rate should be $750 or $1,000, they're always going to have that rate stick in their head. It's stuck there. The only way you're going to get out of that rate is to change clients. And so and that's one of the things that happens a lot of times with staff photographers, where they'll, have a staff job which, pays all their bills, and they look at their freelance work as kind of gravy work. And in an instance like that, they'll do it for far less than the freelance world is doing it. And then all of a sudden they lose their staff job, and they can't sustain themselves on the rates they were charging their existing clientele. They really should be charging rates commensurate with, what it costs to actually be in business if they were full-time freelance. And that's one of the most protective ways they can kind of go about it, running their lives photographically, because they'll be able to make the switch when it happens unexpectedly, or make the switch when they're tired of doing the athlete of the week picture. But the key is to set a rate that is sustainable over time, and not to start out at a really low rate, because what will ultimately happen is you won't be in business for very long.
Right. Now, what about passing on expenses? Like, I know a lot of photographers are kind of shy about that. Like, well, it's my camera. Should I really charge a rental fee for my camera, or digital processing fee, or even parking, or any kind of expenses you may incur along the way? Some photographers, I hear, are a little shy about asking for those kinds of things. Would you consider that to be a mistake?
It's a very big mistake. One of the things that a number of years ago, back when I had to get my film to and from the lab, and then off to the client, the film would go to the lab, the film would come back, and then the film would go to the client in that order. And whether I did the delivery myself or whether I hired a courier service to do it, we billed the client a courier fee. Now, the courier fees that we were charging over the course of a month were more than enough to pay, for example, for my lease expenses on my vehicle. And that was important, because that's the vehicle I use. Now, I did those deliveries myself a lot, but there were times when I was so busy that I had to hire a courier. And in an instance like that, all of a sudden, if all of a sudden my client's not used to being charged a courier fee, and I get so busy that I have to use a courier, and then I start billing the courier, my client's going to go, "Oh, wait a minute, you've never charged us a courier fee before. Why are you charging us a courier fee now?" "Well, I'm busy." "Well, that's something that you've covered in your overhead." It's specific to you, the client. Just like parking is. When I send out an estimate to a client, sometimes I put parking on as a miscellaneous charge, but a lot of times clients will validate parking. They'll have it at the venue that they're having it. They've got valet parking, or they're validating parking. So you never know going into that. If there is parking afterwards, I bill that. I do bill that parking charge, because the client wanted me there, and I had to come there with my my equipment and what I needed. So I will bill the client for something as simple as parking. But if you're doing 2 or 3 assignments a week, and at least in Washington D.C., parking is $20. That's $60 a week. That's almost $300 a month. Yeah. That I'm just throwing out.
Do you when you're on the phone with a client, let's say the first phone call or something, you're having interaction with them, how do you disclose the fact that, like, what do you consider to be legitimate expenses that you'll expect to be reimbursed for?
Well, I outline all of that on the estimate that I send to them. Putting it in writing really sets it out there, and gives them an opportunity to ask questions. Well, why is this or why is that? And a lot of times I'll get one of the questions that I get a lot is, well, why are you, what's this post-production charge, or what's this output charge? Well, I have to do work on their photos. They say, oh, why can't you just, take the card out and move copy the JPEGs onto a CD format? It doesn't take that long. Well, no, it does. It does, because I shoot raw, and I go through and process all those images, and deliver them either on a CD, or, yes, in a slight nod to you, Grover, we use PhotoShelter, and PhotoShelter carries fees, and we bill that output charge. We also bill for our time sitting in front of the computer. And so all of that information is outlined there, and we've figured it out as far as general post-production. I have a calculator on my website where people can kind of go in if they want to play around and use the numbers from my website if they want to. Any of your listeners want to use them, but we actually spend time sitting there, and for 100 images or less, we charge about an hour's worth of post-production, which is 125. For 100 to 250 images, we charge 2 hours, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 250, and goes up from there. Now, that's if it's kind of just general corrections and cropping and so on. If we're doing corporate commercial work, magazine work, then we're charging a digital services fee. And we're charging for the cameras and the capture, and having a digital workstation on site with a 30-inch monitor for the client to be able to review the images right then and there. All of these things are components that need to be considered. Videographers for years have been charging based upon the equipment, whether it's just them and the client provides the camera, whether it's Betacam SP, whether it's HD, 16:9, all these different things. They charge for that equipment. They charge for their lights. We charge a lighting fee or rental fee for our lights when we're doing a portrait or commercial shoot, because sometimes we have to light a portrait and sometimes we have to light an entire warehouse. So factoring in all of these things and passing on those costs is something that you really need to make sure that you do.
Yeah, let's talk about gear. You just kind of touched on that. What about photographers who show up to an assignment maybe without the proper gear or enough gear, or didn't really think through?
Right. Well, that happens a lot. Photographers, I happen to be someone who uses Nikon a lot, and I have two D3s. Well, I go to the shoot with two D3s, and yeah, that's expensive. But what happens if one of my D3s goes down? It hasn't happened yet, knock on wood, but it could happen. And I need to be able to continue my assignment. I need to have. I've had strobes go down on me before mid assignment. I'm sitting there on camera strobe, click, click, click. All of a sudden, you hear this pop that almost sounds like a 22 rifle going off, and that's the flash tube in the head dying. What was I going to do if I didn't have the backup flash? Having the right equipment and backup equipment is critical. I mean, wedding photographers think about it and talk about it all the time. They have an extra set of equipment in the car, but most of them are using two cameras at least anyway, if not three, with a remote or something like that. But it's critical that you have that right equipment. When you go to an assignment, it's a portrait job. Even if we're using three lights, we always bring a fourth as a backup. Always. We try to make certain that we have the equipment necessary to complete the job, even if something goes wrong.
Now, what would you say about in mid assignment or mid shoot to be testing, checking, making sure that the images are actually fine on the card and the gear is working? Is that something that photographers often don't do, or mistake they make?
Well, for me, when I shoot with the D3s, and that's why the D3, for example, or the Canon's top-of-the-line cameras do it as well, we have actually two card slots. And the camera's set up so that I shoot all my raw files to the camera and the image in the card in slot 1, and I shoot a series of JPEGs onto a 32 gig card in slot 2. That way, I always have a backup of those files, so that if something does go wrong with a corruption of a file, I'll still have that JPEG version of it. Not only that, if that as I'm pulling cards out in the middle of a job, all those JPEGs, I can write several thousand to the JPEG card. Something, if I lose a card, never have happened, but if I lost one mid assignment, then I'm still covered. I still have the images. It's having that redundancy built into your workflow, whether it's extra cameras or making certain that you have, camera cards being written, to two, a card in both slots. Those are critical things. And yeah, making sure, that your histograms look good when you're shooting kind of a wacky setup. using your camera in manual once you've kind of determined an exposure, so that something gets thrown off. Lighting wise, you're not SOL.
So it seems like a lot of mistakes people tend to make are things where they're not covering their ass. They're not being careful.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, what about insurance? I mean, I think a lot of photographers think, well, I can't afford that. That's an option I don't really need right now. I'll get to that when I can. Having insurance, or the lack of insurance, is that a mistake that's made?
Not having insurance is a huge mistake on so many levels. There's multiple different types of insurance. Let's set aside life insurance for a moment, although you should have it. Health insurance is critical because one visit to the hospital, you're looking at $20,000-$30,000 in fees. So you've got to have health insurance, but I think maybe what you're specifically talking about is insurance for your business. And if something goes wrong, you need to have insurance in case a light stand falls into a priceless piece of art, or falls in and falls onto a kid in a portrait shoot, and the child gets hurt, or something gets damaged. There are a lot of venues where they require you to have a certificate of insurance in order to come to the venue and photograph. I mean, I know that there are hotels that I've gone to and photographed here in Washington where they will not let me come in and take pictures, even though I'm working for someone who's a guest of the hotel, unless I provide the hotel with a certificate of insurance showing that the hotel is covered in the event that I do something on location to hurt somebody or anybody, one of their other guests or what have you. That's not to say that they don't have their own insurance. They do. They just don't want to take on the liability of having me operating my business there, even for 15 minutes or an hour.
What about insurance for theft? Like if your camera gear gets stolen?
Well, if you have business insurance, which would cover all of your equipment in the event of theft, you also will have the type of insurance I'm talking about, where you're covered in the event that something goes wrong on a shoot. There are photographer insurance packages that do that. And one of the things you want to be looking for is, don't think that you're using your homeowner's insurance or renter's insurance, because not only will that not cover professional level equipment, it generally will cover, point and shoots and, a couple of pieces of camera up to X number of dollars. But it also, in many cases, doesn't cover what's called reimbursement costs. In other words, if a camera costs $5,000 and it's amortized over the course of 5 years, and 2 years into that, loss of that camera, it gets stolen. Use of that camera, it gets stolen. The insurance company is going to go, well, you've had 2 years out of it, so we're only reimbursing you $3,000. And you're like, wait a minute, I need to spend $5,000 to get a new one. No, we're only covering the depreciated remaining value. And so making certain that the insurance that you have has that replacement cost is critical.
Once again, John, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for connecting in here and answering these questions. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling, Grover.